Hi, and welcome to CS4NE. We've got another exciting episode for you. I'm Guy Training, professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
I'm Kimberly Ingram Beck from Gretna Public Schools.
And today we're going to talk to
Anthony Cava. He is a Potawatomi Sheriff's County deputy.
All right.
Does some cyber forensics and is going to talk to us about cybersecurity.
And we haven't talked much about cybersecurity, but it is a very important and growing sector in computer science. And it is something that we need to make sure all students know about, whether they're going to be a computer scientist, a very small minority, or they're just going to be alive and use technology. Having a basic understanding of cybersecurity is really essential.
Absolutely.
So let's go to the interview.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. I'm here with Anthony Cava. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what your experience in computer science and cybersecurity is.
Sure. My experience in computer science is, it's mostly a messy application of computer science. Cybersecurity, I've been interested in ever since, as long as I've been able to touch a computer, so since I was like 10 years old. Now, back when this first started, they didn't call it cybersecurity back in the 80s and the 90s, but I was interested in how to get access to systems that I couldn't get access to normally.
Oh, okay.
And so the kids like that back then found a way to do that. Thankfully, that's not necessary anymore. Now you can go to YouTube and you can learn how to do these things, and you can break into virtual machines that you run on your own computer. But back then, if you wanted to see a type of system you didn't normally have access to, you had to find other ways. I work for the Potawatomi County Sheriff's Office in Council Bluffs, Iowa, and so my job is that I do digital forensics examinations, I do cybercrime investigations. I work on the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. Wow. So I explain it to kids is that we go after bad guys on the internet who go after kids. I guess my interest in cybersecurity started when I was a kid, when I was wanting to get access to the internet. This is before the days of the World Wide Web and so on, but I'd heard of the internet, and there were ways to do it, usually through universities and so on, but a lot of schools didn't have access to it. So kids are growing up in a very different situation now. Yeah. That they're born with bandwidth and computers at their feet, so it's pretty nice. But I started out, my first real job was with a telephone company.
Oh.
And so I did technical support there for a couple of years, and then I moved over to Potawatomi County to the IT department there. And in the IT department, I spent about 15 years doing network administration. Eventually, I became a supervisor, which I regretted. But it was great. It's easier to manage computers because you can tell them exactly what you want to do, and so on. Humans are messy. Then the thing is that when I was there, I wanted to get into cybersecurity. I was very interested in it, and so we didn't have anyone doing the work. And so I sort of hacked my job where I started doing the work to the point where someday later on, when they looked at job descriptions, I could say, I'm already doing the work. Could you put that into my title and my job description? And nice. That worked out. I did a lot, and I still do a lot with application security, where I look at the applications that we run in local government and in law enforcement and try to find vulnerabilities with them so that we can report them to the vendors so they can get fixed and we can make our systems more secure. I also get to do, with the digital forensics side of things, I get to do a little bit of cryptanalysis because occasionally we run into people that have tried to do silly or impressive, clever things to cover up evidence. And so there's a bit of trying to break codes to get into that. It's like solving puzzles. It's a lot of fun. And then I write code and do anything else nerdy that the sheriff requires.
That's awesome.
And I do outreach work like this year, and I was a mentor with the Cyber Patriot teams for about 7 years, and I've spoken at Bellevue University and Metro Community College. They do cyber camps in the summer over in Omaha.
Awesome.
And I take part in some other committees and that, so on. I stay busy.
All right. So what information do you have for teachers to know about cybersecurity?
Well, for me, one of the big things that teachers can instill in the students is going to be understanding and appreciation of, I think it's called layering sometimes in education, but abstraction, layers of abstraction, because the thing is that these days, a lot of what happens on the internet happens out in the cloud, it happens on a virtual machine, and there's all these layers in between you and the actual hardware. And so for students to be able to understand what's going on when they click a button, what happens behind the scenes, they've got to know a little bit about how the protocols work and things like, I don't know if, is OSI model still being taught?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
OSI model. So that's it. An OSI model doesn't map perfectly to the way that networking works, but it's pretty close. And anyway, they have to understand that things get handed off layer to layer to layer to layer, and they might be working on a virtual machine inside of a Docker container on a hypervisor that's in a server, data center somewhere. So there's all these layers to it, and the better that they can peer into those and understand how that works, I think that's going to help them. If they get into IT work, it's going to help them solve problems. If they get into cybersecurity work, it's going to help them find vulnerabilities. It's going to help them, close the doors before the bad guys can find them.
Awesome.
The other thing I think is important is soft skills, because there are a lot of very nerdy, very technically savvy students and professionals, adults out there that just can't carry a conversation. You wouldn't want to hang out with them. You wouldn't want to talk to them. They're like the trope for an IT guy that you would not want to call.
Right.
And the thing is that the technical skills, how to use a computer, how to write code, things like that, almost anybody can be taught that. The soft skills, if they haven't gotten an introduction to that early, I think it's very difficult for an employer later on to try to teach that to an adult. So for me, being a well-rounded person, being a well-rounded employee or practitioner or a researcher, that makes a big difference. And so if you can do the technical things and you can explain your wizardry to the muggles, and if you can do those sort of things, you'll go very, very far.
Awesome.
I've always been a big fan of vendor agnostic lessons as much as you can. Now, there are certain things like, if you learn Cisco, that's not going to hurt you in looking for a job, and it is certainly useful. But there are so many different makers of software and hardware products and networking products that I think the best place to start is with the principles. So for me, on the cybersecurity side of it, I always tell students, read Bruce Schneier. So Bruce Schneier, he's been around for decades. He's a cryptographer, or I should say, he's a mathematician or cryptographer, computer scientist. In any case, smart guy. And he's written a number of books on cybersecurity. And if you look through them, you'd be hard pressed to find a lot of very specific examples of a specific, software version or something like that. He's going to teach you how to think like a security professional, how to think about securing systems. And for the most part, it doesn't really matter what the version of the software we're running or who made the product or whatever. The principles are the same no matter what. And I think those are really good lessons.
And finally, what advice or tips do you have for any students who are interested in a job in law enforcement, specifically digital forensics? Well,
digital forensics and law enforcement and anything nerdy and technical, my biggest advice is be a hacker. Adopt the hacker mindset. What I mean by that is, the word hacker usually gets used as a pejorative. It gets used as an insult. It means, somebody who breaks into banks and steals money or whatever. That's not what it means to me. When I came up, when I was a kid, a hacker meant somebody who was super interested in technology and like taking things apart, figuring out how it worked, putting it back together in new, crazy, creative ways to try to find creative uses for technology. That's what hacking is to me. And so it means being a lifelong learner and staying infinitely curious, just being curious about how these things work. Because one of the things that I've talked to some students, and they're into IT or they're into cybersecurity or digital forensics, whatever, and they're a little bit worried about how am I going to find a job because everyone around me grew up with these computers. Well, the good news is that 90% of them don't care how it works under the hood. They don't take a look. So if you care and you go and find out how these things work and learn about the technical details, then you're going to have a leg up and you can go get a job doing this sort of thing. Don't be afraid of the command prompt. Don't be afraid of Linux, Macs. These are, in what I do in law enforcement digital forensics, they're kind of a niche because there are a lot of people that are afraid to open up the command prompt, that are afraid of Linux and Macs and so on. That's fine. Then you go out there and learn those things and you will have a skill. You'll be the wizard. Nice. Even when you go into a room with people that have been doing this for years, some of them won't know how to do that. My other I guess one of the biggest things that you can do that's going to help you out is learn a scripting language. So not everybody wants to program, not everybody wants to be a full-on programmer. That's okay. Scripting languages are easy. You don't have to compile. You just put the commands in and you run them, and they're super powerful. And so every computer you open up these days has a scripting language already installed. Windows is going to have PowerShell. Linux is going to have a whole bunch, but Python especially. My recommendation is learn Python. So I know a handful of scripting languages. My favorite is Perl, but that's because I'm old. And so I don't recommend that kids learn Perl necessarily, although it's amazing. If you wanted to learn a really good language that works in Windows, it works in Linux, works on Macs, Python. Not only that, but a lot of the forensic tools that we use in criminal law enforcement, working criminal cases, our tools have plug-in capabilities where you can extend the functionality. Those plugins are written in Python. And I've written some of those. And so that lets you extend the capability of what your tool can do. So if you can script, if you can write some code to automate things, you can automate out the boring, repetitive parts of your job so that you can focus on the more interesting, the more difficult things. And so that's what I do. I get a case in and there might be 10 or 20 things that I do on every case. That's all automated. I run a script,
Nice.
It generates a report, and I have all that done. And now I can move on to the things that are unique to this particular case. So it'll help you out. And you can, I think it's important, I guess I'll give you 3 more things. Always carry a pen.
Okay.
Always have a flashlight, especially in law enforcement. You don't know when you're going to need it. And try to find role models and heroes. And so it's usually going to be your teacher. That's who it's going to be. But if you're looking for other ones, like for me, one of my example is Dr. Cliff Stoll. So I don't know, are you familiar with?
I'm not.
So
No.
Cliff Stoll, he's retired now, but he was an astronomer out in Berkeley, California. And back in the 80s, because he knew a little bit about computers and that, he ended up in charge of their computer system out there because they said, okay, you know something about computers, now you're in charge of it. And so I think happens in a lot of academic institutions. So anyway, part of his job was billing, trying to track the billing, because back then you had to pay for the time you spent on the computer. I guess we've gone full circle because now we do it with Amazon Web Services. But in any case, he had a billing discrepancy of 75 cents. And being a scientist, that bugged him and he couldn't put up with it. So he started looking into it. And there's a long story short, this turns into a book. The book is called The Cuckoo's Egg.
Yeah. Okay.
But in any case, that 75-cent discrepancy leads down a rabbit hole that leads to a KGB, operation, and it's international intrigue. And so it was amazing. My point is that he was a hero of mine because there was digital forensics involved. Like that wasn't his job. His job was astronomer, but he ended up doing a bit of forensics and investigation and looked into cybercrime before the word cybercrime existed.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you for having me. It was great.
All right, that was a lot of information and great information. I'm running to fix all my passwords.
Yes, I will have to be taking some additional steps to make sure everything's private. And 2-factor authentication, definitely a good thing to have on. Annoying, but necessary.
It's not that annoying. I've gotten used to ours. We're all in 2-factor authentication, and it makes me feel better about most of the ways that I communicate, especially private information about students, which we need to protect, but also our information. So I'm very comfortable with that piece. Yeah. But password on old website, that is something to think about, because I've had password, literally hundreds of profiles on different things from the time that I was doing iPads in the classroom and all that. I think I've had a password for everything. So clean that up. Mm-hmm. All right, what else did we learn?
Oh man, we learned a whole lot of stuff. Yeah. So I teach cybersecurity, so there were a few things that I'm a little familiar with. So if you are unfamiliar with some of the things that he mentioned, we'll have some links that you can click on, but definitely go to his website. We'll have the link down here too. He's got tons of information and really good stuff.
So we will make sure that we revisit cybersecurity once in a while. It isn't kind of the top of mind thing, but this is exactly what everybody that breaks into your accounts is counting on. So we will come back to this occasionally, and we'll see you next time on CS4NE.